Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Scarlett. I'm a watch journalist. And today we're going to be having a very exciting panel with these three incredible voices discussing the topic of how do watchmaking and jewellery intertwine. So we're going to have three very different vantage points looking at this topic. In order to introduce you to these wonderful people, I will let them give their own introduction. So Scott, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, starting with me. Yeah, sure. Hi, Scarlett. Hi, everybody. I'm Scott Wempe. I come from Wempe Jewelers. We're a big watch and jewelry retailer here in Germany. I'm personally from the family, and I'm involved with the business development side of our business together with my sister, Chiara. And yeah, also very excited to discuss exactly this topic, how do watchmaking and jewelry intertwine, because at Wempe, we always have both sides, and we always meet the customers to speak about this. So, yeah, very interested to get your perspectives as well. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Francesca?
Hi, I'm Francesca Grima, and I'm the creative director of Grima Jewellery, which was founded by my father, Andrew Grima, in the late 40s in London. He's known as the father of modern jewellery because at a time when jewelers were making platinum and diamond bows and beads, he was experimenting with semi-precious stones and crystals. I joined the family business in Switzerland straight out of school. And when my father passed away, my mother and I eventually moved back to London, and now we work with a handful of goldsmiths, and we create around 30 to 40 unique pieces every year.
Thank you. And last but by no means least.
So, hi everybody, I'm Jean-Bernard Forot. Well, I have done all my career in the world of jewelry and watches. Today I'm working for the Piaget Maison, in charge of heritage. It's a long story because this Maison is more than 150 years old. And regarding the topics today, it's true that Piaget has started as a watchmaker and became a jeweler. So when we talk about connection and union of crafts and inspiration, I think we also have a voice to share.
Thank you very much. Now, we're tackling a big question today, and I'm hoping we can sort of delve a little bit deeper. We perhaps might not have one concrete answer, but I expect, we'll be able to ruminate on the different avenues and ways in which they're similar and they're different and what these two disciplines can learn from each other. So my first question to all of you is, are they fundamentally different disciplines, watchmaking and jewellery, or is this a distinction that's mainly cultural that we've imposed on it? Francesca, would you like to start?
I would say as a designer, the difference is more cultural than anything else. But from a designer's aspect, if I look at a watch that is perhaps clunky or very much an instrument, to me that is a watch and it's not a piece of jewelry, but it just depends if it can be classed as adornment and if it looks good on the wrist. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is there a sort of boundary of identifying whether something is more of an ornament and an object than it is an instrument or a tool, would you say?
Yes,
okay.
I would say so. I mean, if it's a grande complication, to me that's a watch. If it's a Rolex Midas, that's a jewel.
Okay. Scott, how do you feel?
First of all, I agree, and it's something I wrote down prior to this panel. There's two very fundamentally different functions. One is measuring and making visible of time. The other is adorning yourself. And this is very historical, right? It's always been that way. I think there is a fundamental difference in what makes something a watch. Like, would you call anything that looks like a watch but doesn't have a movement inside a watch? I personally wouldn't, right? So you always have that heart of a watch, which is a movement, which is mechanical, and that makes it quite different. I also think the customer approaches it quite differently still, but that's starting to change, and I think that's something we can get into later as well.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I don't know if you remember, I think it was Margiela that created a watch that was the no watch, that had, no movement, no dial, and it was a piece of jewelry effectively. Do you agree with that it was, or?
I don't remember that watch,
okay.
I have to be honest. Of course, a watch is a piece of jewelry in some sense, right? There's so many voices that have said, oh, the watch is the only piece of jewelry a man can wear, which, of course, that's not true, but that obviously classifies a watch as a piece of jewelry, and I think it can be. And historically, if we talk about wristwatches, they're coming from ladies' watches. They were usually very small watches, very large jewelry pieces. So the history is very much shared, and it's only over the past couple of decades that they drifted apart a little bit, and now they're coming back together, which I think is quite a positive trend that we're seeing.
Jean-Bernard, how do you feel about this difference?
Well, I agree with what Scott is saying regarding the function versus the ornamental part. Sometimes we can also add that watches sometimes was more linked with the masculine side and jewelry with a more feminine side, where watch you have the function which is less necessary today, that used to be key, both in terms of profession. You have the watch of the drivers, you have the watch of the pilot, so it was also a profession behind. While it's true that jewelry was more linked maybe with emotions, and which has a territory which is larger in terms of creativity, as you said, in terms of inspiration, and just also because of the body. You can put jewelry at many places, from your ears, from your neck, from your fingers, while a watch is more or less on the wrist most of the time, I would say.
Well, Piaget, not at Piaget.
I was going to say, yeah.
That's what I will say. So at Piaget, it's true that we have a vision that a watch is first and foremost a piece of jewelry, it's what you say. And the way we designed, the way we conceived, even today, the creative studio, in fact, you can have a watch designer background, or you can coming from Les Beaux-Arts, you can coming from the jewelry designer, but every one of them is allowed, the possibility to design a piece of watch or a piece of jewelry, whatever his background. So I think the way we have created what we call jewelry watches blur the borders between what is a watch and what is a piece of jewelry, because we are not thinking in terms of, I would say, functionality or category, but we are more thinking about self-expression. So, and recently we also, for a specific event, we did a mobile, which is combining watchmaking, jewelry, it's an object. So when you see it, you put it on the table. So what do you see? Do you see a piece of jewelry? Do you see a piece of watch? Do you see an object? So that's why there is a way to mix and match them. And in our maison, I think it belongs to the story and the DNA. So we don't really think internally of watch and jewelry. It's more when we have to be in the business, or when we have to work with the fact that we come back to categories to make it more clear on the market.
Yeah.
But
I also, sorry, I also think it's a generational thing, because these days someone can just tell the time from their smartphone, so or their Apple Watch. So if they choose to purchase a watch that tells the time that's not an Apple Watch, then it's much more a jewel and adornment.
How do you think that differs generationally from, previous generations? Are you saying that it was more of a focus on a watch as a watch, jewelry as a jewelry, and it's only, this new vanguard of consumers coming through that are seeing a bit more of a blurring between the two?
Yeah, okay. I think it's a new generational thing, because they have so many other options but they choose to buy a watch that's a watch as an instrument.
I would love to riff off that a little bit, because you mentioned something that I think is critical for our industry to generally understand a little bit more, because watches and jewelry are inherently about self-expression. I think this has been neglected a little bit over the past, again, I would say decades, and it's something that's coming back with a more modern generation of customer, younger generation of customers who are looking into vintage, who are finding all of this whole heritage from a bunch of different brands, from a bunch of different brand identities, and they get to pick and choose from a much larger selection than ever before, which is going to be true with the next generation and the next generation. So the amount of choice is getting much bigger. I think that's pushing brands to be more creative again. And what we have to realize as retailers is we have to get to know our customers much better. Because if watches and jewelry are about self-expression, we need to understand what that self is about in the first place. That means we need to be empathetic, we need to be very close to the customer to understand what is their specific style, and maybe challenge them a little bit as well to go beyond what's, let's say, dictated by the market.
Well, how far would you say then at Wempe that you're the translator between watchmaking and jewelry?
I think in many ways that's how we see ourselves and how we've always seen ourselves, but it's something that my sister and I have really pushed the company on and tried to go into a little bit more. saying we have both of these capabilities, right? We produce watches in Glashütte, we produce jewelry in Schwäbisch Gmünd in Germany. So we have the production capabilities, but we've also always sold both categories. And if you come to me with a specific wish for a watch or to one of our sales staff, they can kind of get to know you and direct you into a direction where you might find some jewelry to match your individual style, maybe for a different occasion, of course. But yeah, jewelry is still different. You might want something different in terms of jewelry than you want for a watch. Maybe you want the same thing. Maybe you want, if you're wearing a steel Oyster Perpetual, maybe you want a classic steel bangle to match, quite simple. But maybe you also want an earring that's a bit more flashy to be a little bit more on the edgy side. So I think it's about challenging the customer and also sometimes giving him the courage to, go beyond his own limits and really express himself. Yeah.
Thank you. On the topic of expression, I just want to go back to you, Jean-Bernard, when you were talking about how there isn't necessarily a set formula when you're making a watch, but if you're making a high jewelry watch at Piaget, is there something that's coming first? Are you thinking about how time is going to be expressed and then you think about the material and then the stones? Like, how does that work?
Well, it depends a bit if we are working on an icon we have within the maison, which has been designed as a watch and that we want to dress for a new year. So, of course, we will have to take into consideration where we start from. But when we talk about a more creative field, like, for instance, some segment about medium jewelry or high jewelry, then in fact we are more starting from a story we want to tell, a story that could come from our heritage or a story that we want to tell. It could be a place, it could be an inspiration, and then at this moment, in fact, every designer will work with, I would say, movements, but also stones, whatever the stones, and in fact will be inspired by the story and see how we can reinterpret the story with an object that could be a watch or a piece of jewelry. And sometimes the same bulk of stones can be shared among two designers, and at the end only one design will be finally chosen. But in fact, we give the possibility to start from both. And I think the narrative is strong today because we know that a piece of jewelry or a piece of watch is not just the addition of the material, it's a multiplication. It's what it creates and what you will feel when you will see it. So I think it's very important to have this in mind, because otherwise you can maybe remain a bit limited. Because of course there is always a commercial aspect, and when you are a brand, you have also to integrate that into consideration. So if you want to go a bit beyond, at the beginning at least, you have to start by the narrative, and of course the value of stone and the limit of a movement if it's a specific watch.
Thank you. Francesca, I just want to turn to you for a second and talk about the Grima universe in regards to watches. So I myself came to discover Grima because of the watches your father created, and then I learned about the jewelry universe that you've harnessed. And this has been a similar case for a lot of young collectors and vintage collectors as well. Could you speak a little bit about the story of how these watches came to be?
Yes, so in the late 60s, Omega was... yes. In the late 60s, Omega was sort of going through a bit of a staid, rough patch, and they needed an injection of excitement. And so they were seeing what my father was doing in the jewelry world, that he was revolutionizing it. And so the director of sales at Omega, Bob Foster, decided to get in touch with my father. And he called my father's office, and my father's secretary said, "Oh, Mr. Grima's traveling the world, and he's in Philadelphia at the moment." So Bob Foster got on the next plane to Philadelphia and met my father for dinner and proposed that my father design a collection for Omega. And so my father was quite excited, but he did have a few stipulations, one of them being that the theme would be to see time through a stone. So every watch had a glass that was either semi-precious stone or a precious stone, and that the watch face needed to be absolutely clear of any logos or any numerals. And so that was the beginning of the About Time collection, and it was a huge success. And from off that success, Bob Foster started working for Pulsar in 1976, and then he asked my father again to create a collection for Pulsar, but this time it was much more restrained because obviously my father had to factor in the red digital display on the digital watches, but it was still a very bold collection. And my father, talking back about the About Time collection, said it was the most challenging yet the most rewarding project of his life. And he definitely designed the watches as jewels that happen to tell the time. And I think that's really important for this.
I wanted to ask you there, your father working on this collection, did you see this as an extension of the Grima jewelry universe, or did you see it as sort of this off project he was working on?
I think it was an off project, and it was definitely more of a challenge to him than jewelry making, because he would, designing a piece of jewelry, he would go to his goldsmith and say, okay, well, this is the design, make it. And the goldsmith would turn around to him and say, well, Mr. Grima, this is impossible. And he would say, well, that's not my problem. And that's how we end up with all these crazy designs. But with watches, it was different. He really had to factor in that there needed to be a movement, and it needed to be legible. But he still managed to get his humor out on one of the watches. He chose a rock crystal with these black shard-like inclusions, hundreds of inclusions, and he chose to put black hands on that watch. So if you looked at it, it just looked like hundreds of hands, so you couldn't actually tell the time, which I thought was...
Do you think this collection has shaped your perspective of what a watch should look like?
Yes, growing up, so I grew up with two distinct watch collections. That was my flick-flack collection, and
as we all did.
And the About Time watches. Those were the only watches I knew. And so it was only like a few years ago that I realized that there was this whole new world of watches, and especially vintage watches, which I love. But yes, it definitely shaped. And I think it's shaped a lot of other people's outlook on watches. My father's collection is still inspiring people today. When they come out with designs, they're like, oh yeah, that's inspired by Grima, which is lovely. So.
Thank you. And if we extend out further to the both of you, what do you look for when you look at a watch? We're talking about a design perspective here. What is it that stands out to you?
Personally, I think there's a lot of things that can stand out about a watch. The first thing I look for, and that's something I've been over the years now taught by many of our general managers and so on, because again, they're the ones selling these pieces to the customer. They have usually the best idea of what's relevant to the customer. And as Jean-Bernard said, we have to be commercial, although it sometimes frustrates me. The first thing with a watch, the first thing I look at is proportions. Do the proportions match? Does the case size match the length of the hands, length of the dial markers, and so on and so forth? Then I love to look at shape, but that's very personal. That's why I have a very big love for the Andy Warhol collection from Piaget. I love the idea of alternative shapes. It's something that Cartier does very well as well. I mean, everybody knows the crash, but there's so many different shapes that Cartier has been able to bring out over their history and their whole catalog, which is amazing to always see how you can reimagine a watch. So that's something that's very, very cool. And then for me also, I have to look at complications because I find it technically fascinating, right? Turning the watch around, seeing what makes this watch so complicated. Is it decorative or is it really functional? And then the mechanics are, of course, a very, very big factor to look at for me, yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned there are two maisons that have that dual heritage of watchmaking and jewelry, of Cartier and Piaget. How do you navigate this dual heritage, Jean-Bernard? Do you think it allows yourself as a maison to express yourself in a way that's perhaps different to watch brands that don't have that sense of deep-rooted history with haute joie?
Well, yes, in fact, we have a kind of language or a stylistic grammar. It's depending on how you want to call it. And it's true that when you design, the legacy gives you some evidence For instance, for Piaget, it could be gold work, it could be proportion, it could be shapes, it could be color with ornamental stones, for instance. You were talking about precious stones. Ornamental stones are very different in their nature. And so, in fact, it's true that all these stylistic elements, they are used, in fact, to create a watch or a piece of jewelry that speaks Piaget. Because something which is important in the world of today is that there is always a balance between signature, so the fact that we recognize what you wear, and distinction, how you would like to be seen or different. And this dialogue is also when we are talking about watch, the fact that watches and jewelry could intertwine. You have also this balance between the recognition, in one way the awareness of the maison or of the icon, and on the other side the creativity and your self-expression. So this is something that we try to balance, and of course we have the chance, because we are a brand, sometimes also to try to experiment a bit much more, because as you with the bespoke, or when you talk about Warhol, we can try to take some risks, even if it's in the frame of the identity of the maison. Otherwise, in fact, you have the feeling it's wrong, even within the maison, because we have sometimes choices in terms of design, or in terms of animation, or in terms of color, or in terms of gold engraving, and you feel when it's Piaget or where it's not. And I think today, especially today, in the world where communication can blur also the identity of maisons, well, it's important to stick to that.
I would love to riff off this, because you also in our preparation asked us a little bit whether brands are daring enough to blur those lines, right? And I think the point Jean-Bernard is making is critical. Some brands should and can blur the lines. Others, I don't think probably should so much, to stick to their identity and really appeal to their customers, right? You don't need every customer on the market. You just need a strong base for your product and for your identity, and that is always fostered within, I would say certain. Oh, what's the word in English? Parameters.
Okay. But please.
I just wanted to add something from your previous question. So I'm going back to what one looks for in a watch. And for me, tactility is so important, and I don't think we touched upon that. Mm-hmm. As a jewelry designer, I think, when you're designing a ring or a bracelet, someone is going to run their fingers across it multiple times a day. And I think tactility, and that's where the brushed gold, I'm not going to mention the King Midas again, but I will.
Do you think we don't have that same sense of tactility with a watch? Do you think that you get that more through jewelry, or?
It depends on the watch. I mean, you see some watches, that's not, you can see from a mile away, it's not going to be very tactile. So.
You mean the haptics and
just like what it feels to the touch.
100% is absolutely critical, and it's often what can, from our perspective, this is something that can make or break a sale, right? The watch can look great if it doesn't feel like it has value. If it doesn't feel like it has good production quality, then it just doesn't quite reach that level, even if the design is good.
Or even just the closure. The way it closes, or the way it just brushes on, your wrist.
If the bracelet is noisy and is flimsy, you don't want a flimsy bracelet, and it's just a huge difference in production quality and so on. And it's one of the most difficult things for brands to do, I would say.
Well, what does that mean then for the emotion behind these objects? Let's take a ring or a bracelet and a watch. Do you individually feel something different when you're wearing them? Scott, you have rings on here, but you also have a watch on. Do you feel differently when you put them onto the watch?
I feel different about every object, every jewelry or watch that I wear. I was going to say every jewel I wear, including the watch. So there we go. But that's because to each, its own memories attached. I would say a watch carries similar memories to a jewel. It doesn't really differ too much for me, no.
How do you feel, Jean-Bernard? Is there a difference?
Well, I must say that sometimes when I take my watch, or this one, for instance, in my room, I could have the feeling that you always remember the moment. I don't know why these objects like engagement ring or wedding bands, you are connected with the moment. But maybe what is different is that when I when I take my watch, the first thing I look is the face and to see time finally. And I think with jewelry, probably it will be more in the mirror, what you see. For instance, if you have a pendant or a brooch, you look at yourself in the mirror while your watch, you can see. I think rings and watch or bracelet is something that you see yourself. So probably you look at them directly while, I don't know, earrings or some other designs, you have to look in the mirror. So it's not exactly the same perspective. So that's why sometimes in our business, we used to say that, and I put quotes because probably you won't agree, but in fact, finally, a man is offering more pendant or earrings, while a woman would choose more a ring or a bracelet because it's something that she sees all the times, while pendant and earrings less today. But we have seen, thanks or maybe because of the new generations of, I would say, selfie and working with screens like Teams and so on, that people are again more interested in what you see on the screen than only what you see when you wear it. So, it's evolving.
Okay. Francesca, what about you? So you've recently, over the past couple of years, bought a few different watches as well and, starting to grow your collection. When you try on these watches, do you feel a similar feeling to when you're trying on jewelry?
I think I do. I think everything has an emotion, and I think for me, the emotional storytelling doesn't start with the brand. It starts when the client essentially starts wearing the piece. I think that those are the memories that you make yourself, And I think that I get the same memory satisfaction from wearing a watch as I do wearing my jewelry. Yeah.
You're talking about that relationship there between brand and client, and this is something we briefly touched on earlier as a group, and what you said there, Scott. How far is the brand the catalyst in blurring the lines between these two disciplines, and how far is it the client?
So I think to start with, what's amazing is that in especially the last, I would say 5 to maybe 8 years, the client has become, once again, the major driver of the industry. I think that's really important. And it forces retailers, it forces brands to really look at the client and understand them, and this is something I think is critical. However, I don't think brands should make their decision largely or solely based on market research. You have to be able, as a brand, to know yourself, know what fits with your heritage and what fits with your identity, and within those parameters, push innovation and really push the industry forward. And brands are starting to do that again because they're realizing that the customer is looking for that. The customer is looking for something different. The customer is looking for new stories that are based, right? A new story that is standalone isn't as interesting as one that is based and has historical context. So I think there's some harmony in that, but I think it's great that the client has been the major driver of the industry and we've had to adapt.
And to Jean-Bernard's point there about this sort of digital influx of people wearing things to sort of show what they're wearing, this is quite typical with a younger demographic of collectors. These collectors that are coming through to your stores, are you noticing a specific interest that they're having with watches that perhaps identify a little bit more as jewelry pieces or are far more design focused than they are perhaps utility?
So I think we need to differentiate between collector and customer, right? When do you become a collector? We talked about this briefly. If we look at the big auctions and so on, the collectors who buy pieces there, a lot of them are very, very deep into brand heritages and so on, and that's very important how a given reference fits into the catalog of a brand, how it fits into an era of a brand and so on. So you're going to have people spending extortionate sums of money on a piece just because of its specific history in the brand's catalog. Whereas now you do have customers coming in who are more design focused, and I think there's a chance for brands to get these customers with interesting products. And there's of course a chance to make these people into collectors because they are collecting or starting collections based on their personal interest, their personal style and identity, what resonates with me specifically, and being a bit more free. But the classic collector type, if we're speaking of an archetype collector, I think those are people who are not as focused on design, but more focused on as I said, how a given product fits, how it maybe was pushed by ego as well, by a certain, be it a CEO or be it a watchmaker who wanted to do something crazy and did that. And that makes a collectible piece then.
Thank you. And this current that we're seeing at the moment of very jewelry-focused watches isn't something just relative to now. It's something that has, reoccurred throughout the past at several intervals. If we look at Piaget from like the 60s and 70s, this is an era right now where everybody is very much talking about, and a lot of people are really learning about the brand. Why do you think that period is so standout to people?
Well, I think that it's true when you were talking about the history, we have had a period where watches were more, for instance, masculine during the Industrial Revolution, then they became feminine at the beginning of the 20th century with the secret watches. And probably the 60s and 70s, they are a very strong period of design, freedom, experimentation, where maybe the first time where jewelry and watches intertwine again, because I think the previous time was Renaissance. At the Renaissance, in fact, it's the first time where people used to have precious objects that could be a pendant, a chatelaine, I don't know the name in English, which could be a piece of jewelry or a piece of watch, and nobody really know about it. But the 60s and 70s are again a period where, in fact, everything is possible. And for our maison specifically, it's a period of maturity in terms of style, in terms of mastery, which ignites a kind of artistry. It's where also we are attracted by the style of the maison, big names like Warhol, Jackie Kennedy, Elizabeth Taylor, and so on, who in fact created a reputation. And I think that those pieces today, they are still attractive because they were not so much made for a trend. They were much more made for a statement or attitude of a clientele who used to wear those pieces in places that were appealing for the time. And today, this time is a bit considered like a kind of paradise area where everything was possible. We love those images of the magazines of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar of the 60s, 70s, where we have the feeling it's a beautiful period. And I think that in fact, the pieces we made at that time, but not only Piaget, some other maisons, are maybe more statement than trendy pieces. That's why today we look at them with a kind of nostalgia, but also a kind of desire. And that's why, for instance, Piaget, we have also made some re-edition. You were talking about Warhol, we are talking about some Cuff or some Sautoir watches, which probably in the 90s or the year 2000 were not demanded, but today are again talking about something which is charming because there is a big story behind, and the story of those people and the story of this area.
Can I just ask as well, how long has it been that you've been with Piaget?
Oh, me, 20 years.
20 years. Okay, so you are Piaget.
Yeah, in one way, yes.
and when you first started, were you just on jewelry, or were you watches as well?
So sorry.
Were you just working on jewelry when you first started?
No, at the beginning, I was only working at jewelry design, or jewelry part, yes.
So how did you find that sort of jump and link to moving into doing watches and jewelry?
Well, at the beginning, I think the maison was a bit more divided into categories. While today we are less divided into categories, we are more client-centric. And so the way we design, even if, as you say, we try to remain focused on our identity, our heritage, is a bit different because a same piece of jewelry or a same piece of watch can, I would say, be dressed for different stories within the maison. So we are not just thinking, okay, this is a watch, for instance, for a man, or this is a watch for a woman. Some pieces, in fact, are attracting both. And at Piaget also, maybe something which is a bit specific for the maison is that in the 60s, 70s, Piaget was not womanizing masculine model in feminine animation. It was really designed for women. And so it also created a strong, I would say, backbone of design.
Okay.
And we were talking with Francesca because during that period of the 60s, 70s, our maison were designing much more than what they used to produce. So we have hundreds and hundreds of drawings that have never been expressed, but they keep the style of that period. And when we see them, well, we don't say we put them in a watch box or we put them in a jewelry box. We remain, I would say, more in saying, okay, they are from the 60s or they are from the 70s, but we don't give them a gender
Yeah.
of category, product category.
But what I also wanted to say on this subject is that the 60s and 70s, I think, are so popular now because, I mean, personally, I don't think anything as amazing as the designs from the 60s and 70s has happened since. And I think it was just risk takers being there at the right time in the right place, having a boozy lunch, a gentleman's handshake agreement, and that was it. And now you've got hoops to go through. You know, you've got hundreds of agreements, contracts to sign. You have to go through 50 people. And then by the time that happens, the creativity is diluted, and you end up with a watch that looks like everyone else's. So,
Scott, do you agree? Do you think there's a particular sort of sweet spot or moment where you've seen it really nailed?
Actually, this is something I would agree with. Generally, I think there's too much bureaucracy in design processes at too many places in the industry, which also then taps into something you messaged us about, which is this idea of collaboration. Mm-hmm. Right? You asked us if jewelry designers were working with sort of more. I think you said it's like youth culture.
Yeah, different
things,
artists, things like that.
Artists and so on. Actually, I think some watch brands have done it too. Like looking at AP, who's worked with cores and so on. There's multiple examples. Louis Isère, who works with architects the entire time and so on. But not enough watch brands are being collaborative enough. I really think this is a topic, and it's a topic for our entire industry. Collaboration is essential for future success. I really do believe that. And if you're always so guarding of your own identity, exactly through what you say, it limits the creative ideas where you go into how can we collaborate, how can we, through collaboration, based on two different archives, create something new, create something exceptional that tells a story, but is still a new end to that story, right?
It's fascinating that you say that, though, because a lot of people will perhaps agree here that we see a lot of collaborations also exist in the watch industry, and sometimes every day we're getting news of a new one. So would you say your point there is the type of collaboration that you want to see going forward?
I mean,
what would be an ideal for you?
What would be an ideal? I think an ideal is always difficult to find. You have to think beyond the boundaries of what you usually do. I think that's important, and you have to allow yourself to let creative spirits flow. Maybe do it over lunch with a glass of wine and come up with an idea that's a bit out of the box, right? And I agree, there is some examples, but there is definitely still room to grow in that direction.
But I think the only people who could do it at lunch with a glass of wine are the independent watchmakers who don't have to go through the bureaucracy of
I think you would need to change processes a little bit and let creative people be creative a little bit more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you were to design a watch now, Francesca, do you think you would feel the sense of restriction in terms of the technical side of like the things, with the engineering? Would you lean to what your father did? Like what would that look like?
I had my little watch adventure last year. It was quite short-lived. I designed a watch and I thought, this is a really good idea, a great design. Why has nobody else come up with this idea? And then I got it done on CAD and everything because I don't work on CAD. I work with paint, so pretty old school. And got it done on CAD. And then I showed it to my goldsmith and he said, but at that angle, aren't the hands going to be completely distorted? And I was like, yeah, maybe you're right. So it's been problematic. I've kind of put it in the bottom drawer. Maybe I'll revisit it when I'm retired between gardening projects or something.
Please do revisit it. We would love to see more Grima watches. Would you take any, in terms of how you would approach this watch and the design principles that you perhaps apply to the jewelry that you create? I asked Jean-Bernard earlier with Piaget what comes first in how they create a high jewelry watch. What comes first for you when when you were talking about designing that watch then? Did you think about time first? Did you think about stones?
Obviously not seeing the time. I thought of the silhouette of the case, which was great. and then it all went downhill. But yeah, no, I started with a silhouette. I started with tactility. I thought it needs to feel nice when someone runs their fingers across it, and that was that.
Okay. Scott, if you were to design a new store now, how would you position the language between watches and jewelry in that space?
It's interesting you asked that now because we actually just launched a whole new window concept in Dresden where we got rid of all of this distinction, watch window, jewelry window, la-di-da, and put watches and jewelry together into the same window. And we already see the impacts, right? It prolongs browsing time in front of the window. Because couples stay together, it does make a difference, right? Otherwise you have the guy going through Panerai, IWC, JLC, I don't know, and his partner, the lady walking off into the jewelry section and being like, oh, I'll have a little browse here. Yeah. Oh, come on, can we go now? So that's a change we have made and is something that we're going to continue to do in all of the stores where we renovate with this new window concept. I do think you have to be a little bit more careful if we're talking in-store and showcases. Mm-hmm. One is because, of course, with Piaget, I can put watches and jewelry together in a showcase and tell one story. There's a couple of brands you can do that with. Maybe even Chopin as an example, right? But you don't want to overload and confuse the customer with too many stories in one showcase. And of course, not every brand wants a piece of jewelry exhibited next to their watch because they need to keep their sort of brand visibility pure and so on. So for us as a retailer, even if I would want to do it a little bit more to tell a specific story, I sadly don't have the ability to.
Because, sorry, Scott, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because don't the watch brands send you their little sort of, their maquettes that you have to put in with then logos on it? Oh, okay.
Yes.
So, yeah, that might be problematic.
But again, I would love to tell a certain story that stretches across watches and jewelry, be it finishing techniques, like a brushed satin finish that is made in similar ways with these watches and these pieces of jewelry, and has similar artisanal craftsmanship techniques behind it. But it's a very difficult discussion to have sometimes.
I want to come back to your point as well there about collaboration and brands perhaps working harder or pushing themselves into different areas to make these collaborations mean something. Jean-Bernard, if we talk about these future collaborations, a huge part of that is looking to the past and looking at these moments that we've highlighted where there really was a strong ethos between watches and jewelry. Just how important would you say it is for brands to dig within their archives, and particularly the incredible archive you have at Piaget, to push this relationship further?
Yes, well, in fact, the fact that the collaboration made at Piaget were made because of an encounter, like you were talking about your father and the Omega, I would say, people. For Piaget, it was the same thing. So Mr. Piaget met Armand, he met Dali. So, in fact, it's in one way an unexpected encounter. But the fact that those people, they were meeting regularly, they were having dinner, lunch, and then they were interested in creating something together, but they were not always, I would say, a selling purposes behind. It was more experimental in one way. That's why it was limited. And I think today we have to find again this balance between, of course, the performance, but also the sincerity and the authenticity of why we should collaborate or why we should mix some crafts. For instance, in the world of watchmaking, often we open the door to métier d'art because internally we have not the capability to give enough work for every métier d'art, for enamling, for, I don't know, feather marquetry or whatever. So we have collaboration with many artisan artists, and this is the same thing. It's not just having a contract, it's first having a feeling with somebody. Maybe some people could say, okay, we don't feel comfortable with Piaget, we don't understand your brand, so maybe we are not the right artisan for you. But it's also the case on the other side. We can think, okay, it's wonderful, but maybe it won't fit with what we want to express with our clientele and with our style. So every time I think it's an encounter, it's of course a talent, but it's also, I would say, an emotional, feeling to make it work. Because if we are not convinced internally, how do you
Expect
want to
people-
sell
yeah.
this to your client?
Are there any ways in which we think fundamentally these two creative disciplines of craftsmanship do not align? You know, separate to the fact we said earlier, a watch has a movement in a way that, you know, certain pieces of jewelry don't. Is there, you know, can you highlight any ways where you think they are in fact very different?
For one, I think oftentimes at least the different parts have to be made by different people. The person who designs a movement plan cannot design a gem setting plan, or it'll be very, very tough. You have different artisans working on these things, and these artisans are trained differently and so on. So in how you build up capacity to do both things, it's a very different process, and it can be quite tough to build up both of those capabilities. That's why I'm always looking at houses like Piaget, Cartier, Van Cleef, also Chopin. To have that and bring it together and create that fusion is such an asset to have. And not everybody can do that. So I think that's one of the things that keeps other maisons also at a distance from that. Yeah.
Francesca?
I mean, I think essentially a piece of jewelry only gives you adornment, and it gives you maybe emotional memory from wearing it, whereas a watch in the end is utilitarian, and I think that's the main difference for me.
Jean-Bernard?
Well, I agree, and I will also add something that I wanted to add before, is that when you are a maison which is working on both jewelry and watches, you also have to keep fueling the inspiration of your artisan. So it's also something that you have to nourish all the time. You cannot decide to say, okay, this year we are more watchmaking, tomorrow we are more jewelry. No, it doesn't work that way. We have to keep on giving for, in fact, all the people working within the maison, in fact, a project and design and creativity. So, of course, I agree on the fact that at Piaget we are very masculine watches with complication, with skeleton, sometimes full diamond pavé, so we can
Dance between the two.
we don't know if it's really masculine, feminine, if it's just wealthy or not, but at least it's a piece of jewelry that tells time, as you say. And on the other side, we can work, for instance, on watch sautoir, where in fact, if you get rid of the hands, while you don't know if it's a piece of jewelry or a piece of watch, sometimes we have cuff. The same cuff can have a big cabochon. And another one is a secret watch when the cabochon is opening, but this is more or less the same design. It's just that the stone we find, the first one was very bombé and the other one was more flat. So finally we have decided to give them a different directions. But at the beginning, the intention was very close. So, you know, the more you go on the high end, the more you go on unique pieces, the more finally the creative territory and the experimentation is wild, in fact.
And I just wanted to add something that I saw today, because it's the first time I've seen a watchmaker's bench. There was someone doing something here. And the comparison, I mean, like comparing it to a goldsmith's bench that's dirty and messy. It's just like chalk and cheese. So I just thought
It's very organized and pristine, isn't
absolutely.
it?
So different.
Fully agree, yeah.
Just before we open up the questions to the floor, I wanted to ask the three of you, if you were to buy a watch right now, would you be looking at something that is perhaps a little bit more considered as a jewelry watch, or would you be looking at something that's perhaps a bit more classical?
I don't really know what a jewelry. I mean, my terminology of what. Yes, I'd be looking at a jewelry watch then, but
Okay.
Yeah, I also think it's difficult. I would also be looking at something that brings together some elements of it. in a certain way. Yeah.
'Cause I would say the one you're wearing to me straddles that like
Yeah, it does.
perfectly.
Yeah, It's from back in the '80s. It's a Wempe watch that we did when we went over to New York. It's got similarities with another watch that I would have my eye on if I could tomorrow, from the brand over here, from Piaget, which is the Polo
I don't
79.
care which one it could be.
I was so close to buying an old Polo at a fair in Las Vegas a couple of years ago, and damn, I should have done it.
Should have done it.
No,
I should
it's
have done
far more
it. I
expensive.
would have earned money only on the gold price. And this is honestly also something where it's quite different. You can make steel watches at an entry price. Making that is much easier than actually making
course,
high quality jewelry at an entry price at the gold price levels today, which I think is also an interesting difference to look into the future, because for watches and for jewelry, we need to get people excited about these things, and we need to get young people into this industry. And whilst we need to capitalize on the high value pieces, we need to find ways to really attract young customers who are able to spend a certain range of money on a luxury product into watches and jewelry. And that's getting harder and harder as prices rise, and it's getting maybe even harder in jewelry than it is in watches.
So do we all think that the way to do that is to go down this route of speaking to a jewelry clientele, a jewelry community, making these watches perhaps a little bit more focused on design language?
Well, it's also the role of communication today, because I think the way you communicate on crafts, the way you communicate on a watch or a piece of jewelry can also evolve and open the door. I think that, for instance, the fashion maison, which has been the first to be global, while sometimes watchmaker, jewelry maker, or retailer, we are still very specialized in our expertise. Finally, they have been able to create a bridge among many product categories. It could be bags, it could be watch, it could be jewelry, it could be perfume. And finally, they give a consistency to their product categories. And maybe people are more thinking in terms of maison or brand rather than only watch or jewelry or bag.
We also, you need to unite the communications. That's why I think it's a very important point, right? Funny enough, even from younger people or people my age, one of the first questions I get asked is, so is your sister in charge of jewelry and you're in charge of watches?
Really?
Still, to this day.
Wow.
It's so, and with us, within the family, it's never been that way. Maybe a little bit more with my granddad and my mum, because also different generations, but it's always been very close and very intertwined. So you need to have these two, as a retailer, but also, of course, as a brand, you need to have these two sections very close to each other. As a family business, we made the choice to just marry them. So having these people train each other and pass on information, having the right processes, structures for that. So if I come to you and you're the salesperson, I need to be able to ask you about watches and jewelry, for sure. I don't think that happens often enough, but it's always been a philosophy with us.
So making sure that, sales teams are trained holistically across both of them.
100%.
Yeah.
It's absolutely critical, because a customer for a watch can just as well be a customer for a piece of jewelry. And the same as the other way around. And if I always have to get someone new to answer a new question, that's just not a nice sales process. And it's not luxurious either.
Exactly. Just before we conclude, I think we should open up questions to the floor. Does anybody have any burning questions? Someone?
Now is your time.
Yeah. Ask about Francesca's watch endeavor. Find out more.
Hello. Just when I see the title, what brings to my head is quartz watches. Obviously, Piaget has done the 9P, which is very thin. We see Chopard that has developed a new movement. What's your view on quartz and jewelry watches? Is it a problem? Do brand needs to work on it? And what's your view on quartz within that kind of relationship between watchmaking and jewelry?
I have mixed views on this, actually, because I think for a long time the watchmaking industry has neglected the female, like the females want for, hey, actually we want complicated movements. We want well-finished movements. We don't just want the next quartz piece that's designed nicely. But there's definitely a place for it, and there's definitely a space. I mean, this watch is also quartz, and I love it still. So there is a space for it, but you should never lose touch with the clientele that wants to go beyond that and kind of marginalize women in that way, which has been actually done for quite a long time in the watch space. I don't know how you guys feel, you girls feel about this.
Yeah, I mean, my own personal collection is majority quartz. You know, first and foremost because it's a great gateway into having more watches because of the price point.
Accessible.
Exactly. But yeah, a lot of these watches still very much have a jewelry vocabulary around them, and I don't see that as lesser or inferior in any way. I don't know if you feel the same, Francesca.
When I started on my watch project, I did ask for a lot of advice as to, because for me the technicalities don't matter. For me it's just the aesthetic. And I knew that there were a lot of people, friends of mine, who knew a lot more about watches than I did. And they all said, no, you can't have quartz. You have to have this. I don't care, honestly. No, it's never been a part of. No.
Well, I think for us it's also a kind of a historical story in the fact that you know the Piaget family joined 21 brands in Switzerland who tried to create their own quartz, and then finally Piaget also revealed a very thin, ultra thin quartz movement where the family was proud of it. So in our history, in our maison, quartz is not neglected, even if of course there is I would say the prestige of handmade and manufactured movement, but there is also we are not ashamed to have a quartz movement, because even during I would say the 80s, our maison was doing a diamond river watch, very expensive, just with the quartz movement inside. So it's maybe where we join again the story of watch and jewelry. So what do you buy? Do you buy the river of diamonds and you don't care so much about the movement? Or, well, it's very strange, but we don't have a kind of I would say an attitude to say that quartz is less prestigious, so it should be I would say put aside. It's really depending on some watches, their size, because also we have limitation with mechanical movements. And also quartz has been reinvented today with new quartz movement, which are also very, I would say, efficient and...
Yeah, I mean, they are very different. It might be a different client even. If you use a quartz movement, own it. It's fine, right? But own it.
You know,
don't be like, oh no, it's a quartz movement. It's just, no, it's a quartz movement.
You know, for instance, we were talking about this Warhol watch, which was a quartz movement, and even a huge one. It was a Beta 21, and it was so big that the family decided this specific design, which makes the success of it today. So this watch is like an accident of our own history in watch. Finally,
those are the best.
Yeah, I'm happy with quartz, but don't get me wrong, I would love a sautoir from Piaget, but maybe one day. Any other questions from anyone?
Or maybe a comment. If it's not a question, it could be a comment also, who somebody wants to share.
It's all in the right corner here.
Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the talk. Scarlett, great job moderating, because I wanted to ask Francesca, where is your watch? I want a Grima 2.0. So I wanted to put Jean-Bernard on the spot, but since he's heritage and not maybe future looking, I want a Grima Piaget. But
why not?
I won't put you on the
shake
spot.
Shake on it.
Oh la la.
And we don't have
witnesses.
wine, and we don't even have wine on the table.
But we have witnesses, so there we go.
It's vodka.
It's vodka, yeah. So this is even going to be better than Warhol. But on a serious note, please don't give up. I understand why you gave up, but we need more watches that are not per se form follows function. We need them to be jewelry, and whatever caliber comes in there, it may be quartz, no problem, solar powered, hand wound. So how can we help you to get that project alive, Francesca?
I'll talk to you later.
With wine. Okay, perfect. Well, I think that's it. Thank you all very much for joining us, and thank you to my wonderful three panelists here.
Thank you for your presence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Scarlett.
You.
Thank you, Scarlett.